So the hardest thing about making mistakes is that like sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it until it's too late, that we can be messing up our life without even trying or even knowing that it's happening. And so I want to walk you through 5 ways that this might be happening to you, because I know that it happened to me. Fortunately, I was able to realize it before it's too late, and by sharing them with you, I'm hoping that you'll be able to get some self-realization if any of this is happening, and so you can do something about it before it's too late. Welcome to A Little Nudge. My name is Derek, and for the last 3 decades I've been helping people explore faith and relate it to their ordinary everyday life. And in these videos I'm just giving you little nudges, little tools that can help you live a deeper and a more meaningful life. So let's look at the 5 ways that we might be messing up our lives without even realizing it. And the first one is that we forget what time it is. I'm reading a book called The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom, and he was in a conversation with a friend of him, and his parents lived thousands of miles away, so he'd see his parents about once a year. And he was chatting to his friend, and he was talking this through with his friend, and then his friend turned to him and said this very bluntly to him in the face, and said, "All right, so you are only going to see your parents 15 more times, like ever?" And Sahil Bloom was like really offended by it, but then suddenly the penny dropped and he went on to change his life. He moved next to his parents because he didn't want to see them 15 times. He wanted to see them lots of times. And in his book, 5 Types of Wealth, in the first chapter, he talks about us being aware of what time we're in. And he has these charts, and I'm going to steal a couple of them to just talk it through. And I want you to imagine that here we've got, this is time along the bottom, and this is kind of amount here, as it were. And what he does in his book, he talks about the different types of relationships that we have and what it looks with over our time. So this is like our age and how much time we spend with people. So for example, if you've got kids, so for the first period of life, you're not going to spend any time with them. And then essentially that's what it looks like, that for a while we don't see them at all because they don't exist. And then when they're born, we spend loads of time with them. And by the time the kid is probably age 14, 15, you're starting to spend less and less time with them. When they move out, actually, you're going to hardly spend any time with them. So if your kids are living with you right now, that's the most time you're ever going to spend with them. And then he thinks about our work colleague, and essentially that's what that graph looks like. You know, when we're at school and kid, we don't spend time with our work colleagues, etc. And then between whatever the ages of 20 and 60, we're going to spend loads of time with those people. But then when we're retired, it's going to get really short and we're hardly going to spend any time with them at all. And then he talks about your main relationship that you might have. And let's assume that you were the same partner for your whole life. And then you may be spending some time with them like this when you're dating them, and maybe you get married or you move in together, and then the time goes up like that. And then at this point when you retire, make sure this is on the thing, there we go. When you retire, actually the time goes up again. And essentially what he is saying is be aware of how you're going to be spending your time. So in a relationship that's your main partner, like this one, he's basically saying that through life your time with them is going to kind of go up more and more. It's going to go up when you get married, move in together. It's going to go up when you retire. You're going to spend more time with them. And so he's like, when you're thinking about your life partner, you've got to think about it for the long term, that you're going to be with them. And actually retired, you're going to have less time with your kids. You're going to have less time with work colleagues. The person that's still going to be around is your partner. He talks about work colleagues. You look at that graph, then you're going to spend a lot of time with them in your working life. So you want to choose a working environment where there's good people around. Think about your children, that actually most of your time with children is before the age of 14, you know. And so invest in that time, prioritize that now rather than career perhaps. Because when that time's gone, it's gone. It's no good like when your kids are in their 30s and you think, should we do something together? Because if you're not invested when they're younger, you're going to struggle when they're older. And so he's kind of saying that not all time is equal to our life, that whatever season we're in, there's a particular focus that we need to have. And the worst thing is to invest in the wrong thing. So for example, say that you don't invest in your marriage, in your relationship, and then suddenly you retire and you've got each other, but you haven't built up this deep connection, then you're going to really struggle to spend lots of time together. That if you work a lot and you pick jobs where you're commuting and traveling, and because your career is really important when your kids are home, and then in your 50s maybe you go part-time, actually it's too late because they've gone. And so that's number one, forgetting what time it is. So think about what time it is for you and where you should be investing your time. The second mistake that we can make, the second way we can mess up our lives, is to refuse to change our mind, is to get quite fixed in the things that we think and the things that we believe. Because, I mean, when was the last time you changed your mind about something significant? It can be when we're younger, we can be very curious and we're exploring things, but we can get a bit more brittle and rigid as we get older. We can only consume content or speak to people who think the same thing from us. And that can lead us to kind of die inside and to hold on to things that are not quite right, that are not quite true. How can you retain a kind of curiosity? One of my earlier videos, I made a video about how I changed my mind about wealth and money, that I felt that it was a bit tainted and that God would never want us to have a lot. We should just kind of give it all away. And then I realized that actually God's an abundant God. And that's kind of changed the way that I invest and the way that I'm looking at my money. But that's something that I changed in my mid to late 40s. That was a new thing that God revealed to me, and because I was trying to stay curious. And I'm not saying I do that perfect, I'm probably rigid in other areas, but try and stay curious and open to what other people think who may think differently to you. Okay, so number 3 is about being inconsistent. This is another way we can mess up our lives. And I learned this a lot because so I'm an online writer. I've kind of this little side business where I write online and built a big audience. And so like about 24,000 people follow me at the moment in my writing. So that's like 2,000 a day will read all my stuff. And so I'm in a very good, fruitful place where I'll write something and loads of people will read it. But that calm, because, and a lot of people struggle to do this, because for a year I wrote every day and I published and nobody read it. But you kind of get this graph here, if I was to draw a graph where there's not much attention, then suddenly it explodes and go up. It's kind of exponential growth. It's like a compounding effect. And it's hard to keep motivation here when any individual decision is not going to make much difference. But if you stick it long enough, you end up in this massively fruitful place. And it's not really about online writing, but this applies to so many areas of life. I mean, you think about relationships with your main partner, that you spend time regularly with them. Maybe you make a rule that every tea time we sit down and eat together, or every Saturday we go for a walk, or whatever. You might have rhythms that you spend together, and they're little deposits that eventually deliver a very fruitful relationship. But each individual decision on its own doesn't produce very much. But if you were to start missing a few of those, you would eventually see the effect of that. It wouldn't matter for that week, but over the long term it would. And that applies to wealth building. Maybe you're saving or you're investing. You've got to do it over a long time to get the benefit. It applies to our health, whether it's eating, our exercise. It applies to our relationship with God. Any particular prayer time or reading the Bible, you could miss them and it wouldn't make much difference. But if you were to pray every day and read the Bible every day for 5 years, you'd end up with this massive, deep spirituality that people would love to have. But it only comes from consistently doing it for a long time, and the rewards are not immediate, they're in the long term. And so a big mistake we can make is to be inconsistent, and then suddenly we arrive up in this place of a dead marriage, or we don't have a savings or a pension, or we're not got wealth grown, or our health is really not very good, or we haven't got a good relationship with friends around, or whatever it might be that comes. And so where is it that you need to be a little bit consistent, and lots of little steps will deliver like a really good benefit in the future. So the fourth way that we can mess up our lives is around not setting boundaries. And so I see people doing this all the time. And the way to think about boundaries, so this is where people are struggling to say no to others, and they're being emotionally manipulated or controlled by others, even if the others don't intend it. And the idea of boundaries is you want to think about it as you've both got front yards, all right? So there's a fence between you and your neighbour. And they might have some rubbish, and instead of putting it in the bin, they throw it over the fence onto your land. And you look at it and think, well, hang on a second, that's not mine. And those of us without boundaries will take it on and take responsibility, and we'll go and put it in the bin and we'll carry it, and then they throw more rubbish over and we gather it, etc. And the problem is when we take on other people's stuff, when really what we should be doing is saying, actually, that's not my stuff, and we pass it back to them. So this can be when people have emotional transference and they dump it on us and they try and make us feel various things. Or it can even be like really practical if people aren't very good at planning, like in a work context, and they're always a bit last minute and they've got emergency, and then they get stressed around the office and they push it onto you and they try and get you stressed, etc. And it's okay as a one-off, do you know what I mean? We don't want to like be horrible to everyone, but if it keeps happening over and over, it's like, actually, I'm going to draw a boundary because that's not my stuff. That's actually your stuff. And so we can listen, but we don't take emotional responsibility for it. And I know that when I've coached people around boundaries, when I'm coaching people and you speak to them and you realize actually they haven't got boundaries in their friendship or their marriage or with their kids or work colleagues, and people are just taking advantage of them. And then if you're going to start drawing boundaries to say, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that for you, or I'm sorry that happened for you, you know, you don't be horrible to them, but you maybe don't jump to their rescue all the time if it's their stuff. And when you try to draw a boundary for the first time, you will find a big reaction. And the reason you'll find a big reaction is because people have been used to getting their own way with you. And you will get a bit of reaction. But if you hold your ground, eventually they will realise that there's a new boundary that you're putting in place. And eventually they will settle down. But you'll need to go through a little bit of a stormy water at first. But the worst is to have people throwing rubbish over the fence for like the next months and years. So short-term pain is a really good long-term gain for you. And so we're on to the fifth way that we can mess up our lives without even realising it. And this is... I'm going to say this one and you're going to be like, yeah, that's really obvious. Nobody does that. But actually, when we think about it, we fall to this all the time. And it's this: to do what you've always done and to expect different results. Yeah, to do what you've always done, but somehow hope for a different result. So whatever's going on in your relationship and your finances and your health and your prayer life or whatever, it's probably come because of the way you're living and the decisions that you're making. And we can long for something different. So say we're feeling really lonely. We can long to be not lonely, but unless we do anything different, we are going to feel lonely. We can feel that we're struggling with anxiety or there's tension in our relationship, and we can long for it to be different. But actually, unless we do something about it, we're not going to get different results. And I totally get why we do this, because it's hard work to make a change. It's easy to kind of rely on God's going to do a miracle, or we're looking for luck or magic, or we're just vaguely hoping that something happens. But it doesn't really, does it? It doesn't change without us taking action. And just think about now, where are you hoping that something will change in your life? Where are you got those vague thoughts of you're hoping for your marriage to be better, you're hoping for your finances to be better, your health or whatever. And is that kind of hope and aspiration leading to action? Because if not, then you're falling into this trap of just doing what you're doing and somehow hoping that the result will be different. So I hope those 5 things help you think about how you might be messing up your life without even trying. And if you want some more tips and ideas, you might want to check out this video where I talk about 5 toxic habits that we do every day that can really damage things for us. And that'll give you some wisdom on how to live a better and a deeper and a more meaningful life. Anyway, hope to catch you on the next video, and I really appreciate you watching. Bye bye.